Good evening. Welcome to the Bradford County Historical Society and Friday night at the museum and this month's program, and a few announcements ahead of time. As I always let you know about the museum being open Thursday through Friday 10 to 4 and the first Saturday of the month 10 to 2, and the research library is available upstairs as well. If you're not a member of the Historical Society and you want to receive the magazine we send out 4 times a year, this is the most recent one. There are membership forms out in the gift shop out there for you to fill out. If you don't want to receive it in the mail and you just want it sent to you by a downloadable PDF, we do that too. So you can check that out on our website as well. This evening's program is called The Great Hunt of 1805, and Rich Gulyas is the environmental education specialist at Mount Pisgah State Park. He's also on the board of trustees here as well. So we're pleased to have him tonight to present this program. So I'll turn it over to him at this time.
Okay, everybody hear me well? Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming out. The guy back there asked me if I was around when this time period. No, I got to clear that up right away. No, I wasn't here. So anyway, having said that, I want to start off actually with a little story, all right? And just to kind of set the tone, John Shepherd, this came out of his journal, so you've heard of Shepherd Hills. I'm assuming that's kind of the same family there, but it was back around 1814, 1815. So it was after the Great Hunt of 1805, all right? But this was one of his quotes in his journal. It said, "The wolves were driven down the mountains in search of food, and many sheep were devoured by them. They could be heard howling at all times of the night. The inhabitants were much in fear of them and were afraid to pass from Milltown to Athens, even in the daytime. There was no traveling after dark, so great was the fear and danger." So just amazing when you think about that, all right? So just to set the tone, try to picture yourself back in that time period. What didn't they have back then? Everything. All right, no electricity, no street lights. You know, if you could stay warm, basically the winter of 1814 and the 1815 was brutally cold. So a lot of these large predators were in search of food. Of course, bear were hibernating at that time. But anyway, a lot of things like panthers and wolves would come down in search of food. And guess where they found food? On farmland, yeah. And, you know, you think about today's farms, you know, a lot of farmers have 40, 50 head or more. There's farms I know that have over 100 head right now. Guess how many cows most of these farmers had back then? 3 would be a lot, okay? Most of the stories I read were 1 or 2. So if you lost one of those animals, livestock, guess what? It hurt hard, yeah, it really hit your pocket hard there. So a lot of, like, for example, cows, milking cows, that was their supply of milk for the year right there. I read a couple stories, not related to this, but where they were clearing land and a tree fell on a cow. That was a big deal. So you lost your cow. It wasn't like you could go down and buy another cow from somebody else there. It probably took a year or more to find another cow. So it was, you know, very difficult, you know, times there. So I think we're pretty fortunate now, but, you know, just try to picture yourself at that time period and how hard it was there. So anyway, that's a good tone. I'm going to talk to you about a lot of other things here too. Tell you a few stories too, but there are literally hundreds of stories from that time period there too. So with that, I'll get started. Again, my name's Rich Gulyas, work up at the park there and also a trustee on the board here. Great museum, lots of history here, and they have a great genealogical section. So if you could get a chance to do some research maybe on your family history, other things too. I used a couple resources. There's a book up there that's for sale out here. The History of Bradford County was one of the ones I used to get a lot of background information. I also researched surrounding counties too. So Susquehanna, Luzerne, Lackawanna, Wyoming County, and then up in the southern tier of New York as well too. one thing they all had in common was, guess what? Predators. Yeah. So it was not like it was just Bradford County. It was pretty widespread, and I'm sure it extended out beyond, this whole area too, there when things were first being settled. So with that, I'll get started here, and I'm not real good with technology, so here we go. Map's kind of clear, but picture this whole area wilderness, all of Bradford County. All right, 1805, they drove this whole county with 600 men. You'll see some notes there. So anybody hunt deer at all now? Okay, anybody go on a drive? I always used to be the driver when I was younger. Now I'm staying there. But anyway, so, but picture trying to drive this whole county. I can't even drive 50 acres of woods. So anyway, and you're looking at a lot of ground there. So what was the Bradford County like in 1805? First off, there were no cameras back then. So these pictures are not from 1805. So just to clear that up, when do you think cameras were invented, developed, used? 1890s. Probably pretty heavily back then. Once that was kind of more of a peak back then. Yeah, about 1840 was probably the first photographs taken there. 1830, they came up with a camera that was usable, and so basically there were no real photographs at that time period. The only real history that was documented is in these books right here. So, but if you look at a lot of the stories I read and reported on, a lot of the early settlers that came in here at that time, late 1700s, it was after the American Revolution, they would basically clear an acre or two of land, and think how hard that was. They didn't have bulldozers, didn't have, excavators, things like that. So the trees were, bigger than your arms. So they had to get rid of those, burn them down. A lot of times they would burn things down, clear them, make stump fence rows, things like that. But a lot of the early reports, even for growing corn, up in the corner up here, basically they would plant like an acre or two of corn, go back down the Wilkes-Barre, Williamsport, other places, and then come back to harvest the corn back then. So what do you think happened in the meantime? There were a lot of deer back then, and there's a lot of deer today, but it seemed like there was an awful lot back then because hunters and a lot of the early colonists too and settlers depended on it. The next picture over in here, they're peeling bark off a log. Was that back 1805? Way after that, yeah. That was basically used for tanneries, things like that, once they started LaQuinn, Barkley Mountain, things like that. So, most of the tree felling, it was purely removal. There were some reports early on that they would use ashes from trees, things like that. They would sell them to some of the bigger factories to make soap and stuff like that. So there were a few early reports like that. Predators, that guy looks like he's yawning up there, but anyway, hopefully you're not all yawning later on here. But there were lots of predators. Mountain lions were very prevalent, all right? We still, occasionally hear reports and sightings of mountain lions. The Native Americans basically lived in fear of mountain lions. They didn't harvest them. They didn't go out and collect furs from them, make necklaces out of their teeth or anything. So it was kind of a bad medicine, I guess you could say, to even kill one at that time. So their population grew and grew. Reports for furs, they weren't very valuable, yet they were pretty significant predators. Out of all the stories I read, guess how many people were killed by predators back then? And I'm not an animal hugger by any means, so no. What do you think? Yep. Anybody want to take a guess? None. There was nobody killed. So by a bear, mountain lion, whatever, wildcat, things like. There were certainly reports of them injuring people. Not a lot, though. There were some of that. Seemed like more kids were injured than adults and stuff, and that's a whole nother story there, too. But anyway, nobody was killed back then, but you hear of reports out west where a cougar or mountain lion attacked somebody more recently there. Basically, those are the juveniles that don't have a territory, and they're trying to find food. They're starving. And somebody runs by jogging, so don't all start jogging, okay? Anyway, but That's food. So, and those are the reports that you hear about. It's generally not a full-grown mountain lion, an adult mountain lion that has its own territory established that's doing that. So, okay, why did the early settlers have a great hunt? Of course, it was suggested by somebody, and his name was Buck. So if you know anybody, I'm not picking on Buck. I have no idea what his last name was. But it was basically to rid the county of wild beasts. And like I said earlier, if you lost a cow, a sheep, whatever at that time, that was a big deal. You didn't have a lot of them. So he decided basically to get some people together and have what they called a great hunt. Now, there were other hunts after this as well, too. There was one around 1818. That they not only shot predators, but also deer as well, too. This one just focused solely on wild predators to try to rid the county of them. So, but anyway, a lot of the stories, you could hear wolves howling at night. I read a lot of that. They called it the howling wilderness. There was reports of wolves going on roofs of houses. There were reports they bring livestock in. Most livestock at that time period were free ranging. So they just let them out in the woods because they didn't have hay fields to turn cows loose and stuff like that. So, but anyway, they would gather the livestock up in the evening and build a pen next to their house. And sometimes that's how front porches got started. They'd build a pen around front porches and put all the livestock in there too. So it's kind of interesting. What we take for granted today, what they were doing back then was totally different. So anyway, going the wrong way here. All right, so basically organizing the hunt, they had several meetings. 2 hunts were supposed to be held. Most of the research I found was on the first hunt in June right there. And there was supposedly another one in November. I could find very little information about that. But it says a small army of volunteers. It was about 600 people volunteered. The hunt of 1818, they had about 900 people that volunteered, and they even posted that as far away as Wilkes-Barre to get people to participate in that. So, but anyway, it was decided to form a circle around the afflicted area, which was the whole county. So the picture of the cabin there, pretty much similar at that time period. Picture a cabin, most of them at that time were about 10 by 10, and a whole family was jammed inside of it. So, we might have, a couple cabins right here. You'd be real up close and personal at that time. So you got to really enjoy being close to your friends or family there, all right? So anyway, that was the size of the cabin, especially early on. Later on, they started to develop some of the bigger houses and things that you see, but they needed a place to stay in the meantime. Winters were pretty grueling back then, too. So now, organizing the hunt, I don't think he participated in the hunt there, but anyway, cute little bugger nonetheless, and he is holding the gun. So anyway, everyone was old enough to carry a gun was allowed to participate. So didn't have a whole lot of rules there. Each hunter had to carry a gun, a hatchet, and a knife. So that was your main survival tools back then. Each person was also required to carry 2 days worth of provisions. So this was actually a 2-day hunt for the whole county. Now, I probably would take me a week to walk across the county right now. So picture moving, all them men and trying to synchronize all this at one time. It must have been quite a feat because they didn't have walkie-talkies. They couldn't call somebody up. The hunt of 1818, they apparently sounded horns so people could hear and know when to start that one there. But there was no reference to that. Okay, only predators were to be hunted, no deer or elk. There were plenty of elk around here at that time. A few stories I read. Any Northrups in here? I know there's a lot of different family names, but some of you may have heard of Northrups. Are down, the family's still around, members of it, down towards Monroe. And they actually caught one of the last remaining elk in Bradford County with ropes, took it down into Monroe and put it on display. That was in the later 1800s, and people would come from all over to see that elk there. So it's kind of amazing, some of the stories, but in this particular hunt, the hunting party was to be divided into companies of 10 men each, all right? And each party was under the command of an experienced woodsman or hunter. So guess what they called an experienced woodsman or hunter back then? What do you think? They had a great term for him. A Nimrod. Okay, now, when I think of a Nimrod today, what do you think of? Somebody that, maybe not the person you want leading you through the woods there, okay? But back then, it was a very important, highly regarded person. So times change, terms change over time there. But anyway, so what types of predators existed in 1805? Panthers for sure, and there's several names for panthers: mountain lions, cougars, pumas, plenty of wolves, lots of reports of those. Bears, there were both red and gray foxes here. They were both native, although their numbers weren't really high. You'll see later on, I'll show you a report of what they harvested in this hunt. But anyway, the red fox is more common on farmland. It blends in well with dried out fields, farm areas. The gray fox is more typical of wooded areas, brushy areas, things like that. So, but there was no real great numbers of those. Catamounts, I have a question mark. So what's a catamount? A lot of the history books referred to catamounts. What do you think? A wild feline. Good, that narrows it down. Yeah, thank you, yeah. But anyway, a catamount back then was a term they used at that time period. We don't use it today anymore, right? It generally referred to a panther or a mountain lion, but it also referred to a lynx and on occasion a wildcat too. So it seemed like it was just kind of, if you didn't know exactly what it was, we'll call it a catamount, all right? So, and it had big teeth and stuff like that. So polecats, generally, a lot of people, we talked about this earlier, refer to them as skunks. They were weasels. So, and we've all heard stories about weasels getting in chicken coops and things like that. So, coyotes, kind of interesting. I have some furs up here. I'll show you those later on here. But anyway, coyotes didn't show up on the scene until about 1930, 1940. So a lot of people think there were coyotes back then, but you've all heard of coy dogs, things like that. I remember reading a report from Fur Fish and Game. People would travel out west in the early 1900s, and there were people out there selling puppies. Guess what they were? Coyotes. So how would you like to bring home a coyote and raise it and then find out it's a coyote? All right. So, but they turned them loose too. So those were some of the early documentation there, you know, from those. So obviously the picture that you see there in the bottom, that's a mounted coyote. Look at those teeth. You got to show the teeth, and then the person in the back that got attacked by it, and then the, you know, the giant deer, set of deer antlers. But anyway, you know, think about some of the stories that went around then. If you were attacked by a mountain lion, what would you do over time? You'd tell him, right? He'd go tell that person, and so on right down the line till it got to the back of the room. Would it be the same story? Probably not. It'd probably be you got attacked by 12 mountain lions, and you know, they were all over 400 pounds. By the way, I brought along a tape measure. So the biggest mountain lion was harvested in Bradford County. I'm not sure where my tape measure is here, but maybe up front. I need a volunteer, so somewhere around here. Anybody see a tape measure? All right. How big is, I thought I had one. Oh, there it is. Okay. All right. It's under the furs here, so who wants to volunteer? All right. Thank you, sir. All right, so you hold the dangerous end there, and then I'm going to let it go right now. All right, this is 12 foot. Okay, the biggest mountain lion that was harvested in Bradford County from the tip of the nose to the tip of the tail was that long. It's huge. You know, that's a big cat, probably a record book cat there in these days and age. It does. Yeah, I know, but hey, it's in the book. All right, so that's a little over 11 feet right there. So it was about 11 foot 1 inch that they measured. So picture something that big back then. I read it, thank you, sir. There, I'll take the brunt of this there. But anyway, I read another report of elk, not that we're going to talk about elk, but they found a set of antlers in Susquehanna County, and you could flipped over, bless you, flipped over, you could walk through them. So the set of elk antlers in the barn, I could walk right through like a doorway. So that's huge. I mean, that would be another record book, you know, elk at that time anyway. So anyway, that's basically what was around here. So early on predators, even that little bobcat up there, that's not a very big bobcat I got mounted up there. They were definitely afraid of bobcats. So are the deer, by the way, right now too. But anyway, they seem to do well here. So what types of livestock did farmers have in 1805? Like I mentioned earlier, not a lot. If you had, a couple sheep, a cow or two, a pig, there was no stories of chickens, which kind of surprised me. So I'm sure they were around. Chickens are pretty common things, and I'm sure people ate eggs. They referred to, I did an earlier talk here on weather, and they referred to hail the size of chickens' eggs. So I'm assuming they were around here, but none of the story in books talked about them. Maybe it's just they were so common that it, wasn't there. But other things, of course, horses and oxen too. So livestock was a precious resource. How was wildlife used back then? Food, basically they ate everything: deer, elk, bear, turkey, small game. And they even had a lot of hunts into like 1850, 1860. Once all the predators were gone, guess what they had hunts for? Turkeys, rabbits, small game. And they still have, group hunts today at this. I know there's a big one up towards Rome and stuff like that. So clothing, mainly furs and skins. Basically, your clothing were most likely made out of deer, buckskin pants you've heard of, hats, shoes, furs, winter coats, blankets, right? A light source, so they used animal fat for a light source. Like I said, they couldn't turn on the switch there. So they'd use it to make tallow, mainly hardened, heavily saturated animal fat from around the animal's kidneys, which I never realized that. You think fat's fat, but no, I guess it's better around your kidneys. So anyway, but dense fat from the rest of the animals was also used, but required more processing. So bounties. Now, I don't know what the conversions are. The first bounty was in 1683. And it was established in the United States, basically in the East Coast. There was nobody out west then. It was 10 to 15 shillings for a wolf back then. So I don't know what the conversion is from shillings to that now, but and why females paid more for the first bounty. Maybe because they, gave birth to young ones there, so they got a higher price. Mountain lions were added to the list of bounties in 1802, and in 1806, basically the state set up a bounty of $8 for a full-grown wolf scalp. And what's a wolf scalp? What do you think? It was basically 2 ears and a little bit of fur up here. So you didn't have to turn in the whole thing to prove it. But you notice too, it was $4 for a pup. So I guess the closer the ears, smaller the ears is what, they must have had a size range to distinguish between adults and pups there. I did hear some sad stories. People would take a wolf pup, dig it out of its den after they shot the parents, and raise the pup to adulthood and then kill it for the bounty money. So that's kind of sad, but times were hard back then. I heard of another story where a guy's family was starving, and this was up towards Litchfield, and he went out to shoot a deer to feed his family. Well, he saw a deer coming through the woods. Right behind it was a wolf chasing it. He decided not to shoot the wolf or the deer to feed his family. He shot the wolf to collect the bounty off of it, and then went back out deer hunting. So tough decision to make there, at that time period there. But so anyway, 1819, not far after the 1805 hunt, for a wolf scalp went up to $12. And then there's some records in 1864, Bradford County paid out $264 in bounties for wolves and $136 for panthers. So the last wolf in PA was killed about 1892, and same thing with panthers there. So by that time they had pretty much been decimated and eliminated here. So some other research I did, Hollenbach's General Store, 1787 up in Athens Township. They bought furs from bear, marten, fishers, otters, raccoon, and wildcats. So there was definitely a fur trade going on. One of the things, some of you I'm sure are aware of it, but this is not a predator. Anybody know what it came from? A beaver. All right. I don't hear any stories about beavers attacking people or anything like that. Probably most settlers didn't care about beavers. By about 1684, beavers were almost extinct. Why? They used them to make hats. That was the primary thing, and some for coats too. So, but basically, what they would do, these are the guard hairs on a beaver, and right down here, it's kind of a more softer, denser fur. They would soak the furs in mercury. Well, scary, huh? You ever hear of Mad Hatter's disease? Yeah, it made people go insane. Well, the hat factories, they were soaking these pelts, and then they'd take the fur off and they'd make a felt out of it and then glue it onto a cardboard frame to make top hats. So they were popular from about mid-1700s up till about 1850 or so there. They were all made out of beavers. There were reports of thousands of beavers being harvested across the country, so it's a big deal. Even the little guys were, really wiped out then. So it got to the point in Pennsylvania, they actually stocked beavers back in Pennsylvania to build the population back up. So anyway, just a little bit of history. Another thing to set the stage back then, guess who had control in the early 1700s of Bradford County? What do you think? It was the Iroquois. Why? For beaver pelts. So they basically wiped out the Susquehannocks, several other tribes that existed around here, and took control of this whole territory. Well, they only wanted it for beaver and maybe some minor hunting. So this area was void of pretty much anything for quite a long time there. And then when the early settlers moved in after the American Revolution, their population started to go up. And the predators were already pretty well established at that point. So, and there was lots of reports of deer, passenger pigeons, rattlesnakes, things like that. So I'll read you some of the stories in a little bit here. But so anyway, just a little bit more. Early 1750 to 1850s, hundreds of wild animals were trapped by settlers in snares, by pioneers. I'm sure a lot of stories never made it into the history books, that these animals were that common. Like I said, early hunters were well admired and respected. So if you were starving, let's say you ran out of deer meat, guess who you called? A Nimrod. And they would go out and hunt for you. There were reports of some of the early hunters harvesting over 1,000 deer in their lifetime, which is hard to believe. There's some reports that I read too, bear, for example, they were harvested. The one guy shot over 50 bear in his lifetime. So just amazing there. Tales of wildlife attacks on livestock sometimes carried on for generations. So like I said, if one attacked you or attacked your livestock there. I have a neighbor down the road. He has some beefers right now. One of them was giving birth. This was about 2 years ago. And he has pictures on his game camera of a coyote pulling a calf out of a cow. Kind of disgusting there, but do you think he likes coyotes now? No. So you could imagine that story, and I'm sure you're going to go out and tell other people that story. Well, how are you going to feel about coyotes? We ought to get rid of them all right? And we're starting to, see that again. There's tons of hawks, owls, not so many owls, but a lot of hawks around. So I hear a lot of people, eagles. I know a guy in the back there had some bad experiences and heard about them there with sheep eagles going after sheep. So I think we're going to start seeing a kind of a resurgence, maybe not the same species, but others there. So last bullet there, no game laws existed at that time. Another important factor to remember there too. It wasn't like somebody track you down and fine you for shooting 22 deer or whatever. There was no fines for it. And it wasn't until 1873 that killing fawns with spotted coats was illegal, which is hard to believe. So everything was pretty much fair game at that point there. So I like that picture over there. Notice anything about it? Lady swinging an axe. There's a guy getting attacked by a wolf, and she's swinging that great big broad axe at that wolf there. Now think about if she missed. Who's right behind that? So anyway, that's one of those classic pictures. But these were yeah I don't know, yeah, we're not going there, but anyway, so picture some of what was going on, and people read stories like that. I mean, they didn't have computers and obviously all the new information here that we're bombarded with every day. So this is what they saw, So you can imagine some of the stories. So basically hunters and trappers were very important, and I think I mentioned earlier, they supplied a lot of different things that settlers needed. It's not like all the settlers went out and hunted, all right? So, which was kind of interesting. I always assumed, okay, you saw something, you went out and hunted. But a lot of people didn't at that time. Why do you think that was? Too busy trying to survive. Yeah, growing crops, maybe building a house, taking care of making soap, doing this, doing that. There was a lot of things going on, besides hunting too. So they relied on these people here to harvest some of these animals here. So, picture antler and bone there. Pretty much every knife at that time period had antler on it, bone handles, things like that. A lot of your silverware, which probably didn't have a lot, all had that, so you needed a lot of these different resources. Then you get into the politics of things. So everybody recognize that story over there? Look at the bottom, little Bo Peep and her foolish sheep. All right, so everybody's probably heard that story there. When did that start? It was basically published, they developed in 1810 or so. A little bit after that it went out in publication there. So again, after 1805. Look at this over here. This was just in a magazine in the 1800s. So you got the wolf up there, more of a political cartoon. The wool industry right there, the wolf up there, the kind of gun there. So a lot of people would read things like this. Of course, neighbors would tell them stories and consider the losses agriculturally and the culture at that time period. So if I kept telling you more and more stories, you'd probably want to go out and eliminate every animal out there, right? So it was a big deal. How about this story? You know what this one was? Little Red Riding Hood. Didn't start basically back until about 1850, 1860. All right, but there were lots of stories from Europe. I remember my grandmother telling me a story when I was a little kid. You got to close your ears. This is kind of horrifying there, but anyway, she grew up in Czechoslovakia there. It was great grandmother. So my grandmother's telling me this story. So she grew up over there. They would not go out at night. Why not? Werewolves and vampires. Yeah, they lived in fear of them. So I remember my grandmother telling me the story. She went over to visit the family over there, and she bought them a refrigerator because they first got electricity in the village. This was in the early 1900s. So far cry from that. She also told me a real scary story, and I was a little kid, and don't go home and tell your kids this, but my grandmother said her mom never used to wear underwear and drink a shot of whiskey every morning. So I don't know, and I'm about that big listening to this story, so I don't know what the significance of that was, but she lived to be 98, so anyway. So were all these stories true? What do you think? Yeah, that's a giant mountain lion, that measurement there. So, I do believe, a lot of them were true. There was one story I read, that is not a moose, it's an elk. But anyway, so you can see that's definitely not true there on the right there. But there was one story in Susquehanna County where a fellow was hunting a buck. So he wounded it, and he was tracking a blood trail. And basically it went to the Susquehanna River, and there was ice on the river. There was an opening. He saw the buck go in there and then disappear under the ice. So he decided he wanted to get that buck. He went out there, swam under the ice, and captured the buck at the next opening, which he knew was down there. I'm thinking, how many people would do that today? Nobody. That is, and whether that was, a true story, it's documented in the history books, but different breed of people, I'll tell you. So anyway, great story. But, there are lots of stories like that. So getting back to the Great Hunt. So the hunters gathered at 6 a.m. and started to hunt at 6:30, and the circle was to be reduced by basically 100 miles 10 miles, the first day. So it was a 2-day hunt. All right, so they basically closed in, set up camp and things like that. And it said in the history books the hunters stood in ranks 5 deep. So I'm not sure what they referred to by that there. I'm still in shock because, they drove the whole county. I'm already lost. But anyway, when you look at it, those 600 volunteers, like I said earlier, participated in the hunt. That was at that time, there was about 5,000 residents in Bradford County. All right. The 2010 census there were 62,000, and then actually in 2020, another census, there was 59,000 people in Bradford County. So the numbers kind of went down, and that is typical of certain areas of the country too. People are looking for jobs, trying to move out, in and out of areas too. But anyway, then getting back to the hunt, the circle of hunters covered a large area. The hunt was approximately 40 miles across and 120 miles around. I did the math, I'm not very good at math, but that came out to approximately 5 hunters per mile. Now picture 5 hunters in a mile. Drive in your car and figure out what a mile was, and 5 hunters driving. What do you think a lot of the game did back then? Right through. Yeah. So when you see the reports of what they actually harvested, I'm shocked. They harvested anything. So, but anyway, and the hunt also covered portions of Luzerne and Lycoming County. And just some little facts, Bradford County was formed around 1810. Headwaters of Wyalusing Creek were also included. So how'd they do? Pretty impressive when you think about it. If you look at bear, 92 on the first day, bear 53. That's a lot of bear, but guess what? That's how many we harvested last year in Bradford County. So impressive, yeah. I look back at the records. That's, you combine 92 and 53. I'm not doing the math here, but anyway, that's how many bear were harvested last year throughout the season. So we still have quite a few bears. We don't have any more panthers, although you hear lots of reports of them. I don't think there's any viable population of them breeding here and reproducing, although there are lots of sightings of them. But I just don't think there's, a big substantial population of them. But anyway, 40 panthers, 32. Fox, not so many, about 20 and 17 there. So bobcat, and probably we're referring to wildcats too. Not a lot there, but 13 and 15. And you add up those totals there, it was amazing, that they harvested that many. So what I'm thinking, at that time period, there was a lot of critters out there with teeth, okay? Because if they were able to harvest that many, and those lines, 5 hunters a mile there, there was a lot of game that went through the line. So you can see why they had another hunt in 1818 and so on, and it took quite a bit of time to eliminate them things here. So anyway, was it successful? Yes. The first line says it all. No reports of injuries or fatalities. The hunt in 1818, they formed circles and moved towards the center. They moved all the game in the center and then started shooting at it. What do you think happened? People got shot. Yeah. Not a lot. It wasn't a brutal slaughter or anything there. I'm sure the deer were more scared than the people. But anyway, so that hunt, in 1805, 372 predators harvested. Bounties amounted to about $550 at that time. And they also sold the furs, and that came up to about $2,500. And then each hunter got about 35 pounds of highly prized bear meat, which I don't know why it was highly prized. Anybody ever eat bear? Is it highly prized? It was okay, yeah. It was very good, you liked it? Okay, all right, so I've eaten it. It was okay, I'm not writing home to anybody about it there, but I've had a lot of bear meat given to me over the years too. People want it. Yes, it is very dark meat. So, at that time, I'm sure it was a very important food resource, and probably the way it was made was more of a delicacy there too. So, but they also divided up the bounties too, and the furs at that time, between them there too. So there was, economic return on them there from that standpoint. So did it solve the problem? No. Probably didn't put a big major dent in the whole thing there, but they tried. The next hunt in 1818 seemed a lot more organized. The bounties went up, and you could see that over time. The bounties went up to a certain point until basically nothing was harvested anymore. And then it started dropping down. So just a reflection of them. Are bounties successful? What do you think? They helped at that time. Pros and cons, there were reports early on. For example, I think the last mountain lion or wolf was killed back in 1893 in Pennsylvania, somewhere around there. There were reports of people bringing in dead wolves or scalps from outside of Pennsylvania for the bounty money, because Pennsylvania had a higher bounty than the surrounding states. So whether that's true, another one of those, I don't know what, if there were people standing along the state lines and, counting and all that stuff. But anyway, so it became an issue there. So as far as resources go, gathered a wealth of information right out of that book on the table there. If you're interested in, it's a treasure trove of information right there. And as well as a few other resources. And I told you I researched a lot of the surrounding counties there. I got information from the Sarah Historical Society, Taiga Point Museum, and the Libraries of Congress as well too. So it's been interesting doing that. Hopefully someday I'll write a book, right, Matt? Absolutely. Matt's written several excellent books. So I've got some pointers, but it's still in the conceptual phase yet. So I like hunting more than writing. So anyway, anybody have any questions at all about anything? Did they have rabies back then? There's a theory the current rabies virus, they believe was brought, remember I mentioned red and gray foxes? Well, there wasn't enough red foxes, they believe at the time, to do the fox and the hound thing, where the English would ride horses and chase foxes. So they actually brought, there's some documentation, they brought foxes over from Europe that had the rabies virus that is existing here right now. So there was different strains of the virus throughout the United States, but that particular strain they think was introduced with fox here from that period. So, very good question there. So, yes?
In an earlier slide, you said they were scheduled 2 hunts, one in June and one in November.
Yeah.
Did they have the November hunt?
I believe they did. There was a little bit of reference, but no real documentation to that. So whether people said, I'm not going hunting in November, I don't know, But the July hunt seems a lot nicer as long as it wasn't like it is outside now, But anyway, so yeah, I just didn't find, Matt, do you recall seeing anything on those later hunts there at all? So yeah, but very good question. So, I'm assuming they did have one and all that, but so. Any other questions at all? Yeah.
One of the history books I read on it, I think it goes from 1625 to 1924.
Mm-hmm.
Bradford County.
Yep.
The only thing they mention about the hunt in November is that it was very successful. That's all they said about it.
Okay. All right. So, okay.
The other question I have is, you mentioned that 2-mile radius when they got there, they were supposed to start shooting.
Right.
One of the history books referred to that as Slaughter Hill.
Yes.
Do you know where that is?
Basically, I know one of the areas that they encompassed was up towards Athens. And it went from basically Milltown, and they congregated them at a certain point. There was another hunt I heard they had right up in Round Top, was never really referenced as a
Would that been more of the 1818 hunt where they went through Owego, or something?
and came down, yes. Yeah, that was, I believe, ties right in with that one there. But there was also other deer hunts where they built fires and drove the deer into the center and left one opening, and then hunters would shoot at the deer as they ran out that opening right there. They lined up on both sides too, which brings up some bad thoughts in my mind there too. So anyway, you had to be a really good shot. Earlier too, you think about this was with flintlocks. So first off, powder was very expensive, lead was very expensive back then. So, I mentioned a lot of people didn't even own a firearm because of the cost of buying equipment, owning lead and things like that. And so it really, was an economic thing as well too. And you also factor in weather patterns too. I talked briefly about deep snows and, cold winters, but picture back then. There was one year, I know I did an earlier program, they had a recorded frost every year, every month of the year, I'm sorry. So guess what happened to the crops? No crops. They got wiped out. So that was their food supply, not only for them, but also for their livestock too. So if you lost everything there, you probably, and a predator came in and ate one of your cows, you're probably even madder back then, about that. So I think all these things kind of played in, weather, politics, economics, into the whole thing. And again, it was a different time, Today we might not, if I talk to somebody told me I did a program on geese years ago, and they said if I went downstate and talked about killing geese, they would hang me down there. If I talked about killing geese up here, you'd probably hold a picnic for me. You know, so yeah, anyway, so it's, you know, people change, times change, and, you know, right, wrong, whatever. So, but any other questions at all? Yeah. Did they eat mountain lions? No. Never heard of any reports. Even Native Americans didn't, you know, eat them, use them. So the archaeological evidence is very scarce reports of any kind of mountain lion bones, anything in the refuse pits and things like that. So, which kind of surprises me, you know, from that time. Yeah. So I don't know. I never ate mountain lion. I don't know what it tastes like, but probably like chicken, right? So I don't know. Everything tastes like chicken back then. So yeah. So I had just a couple reports here. Let's see here. Okay, I mentioned that William Northrup was a guy's name, killed 50 bear. He killed 21 deer in 1 week. Picture that. So, I mean, that's, you know, a lifetime right there. Here's another report. This, I'm not going to point to my wife, but she is in the crowd here, so anyway, I got to be nice. But anyway, her Aunt Sophie, now this is way, way back when, okay, lived down in Monroe there. And basically, what happened, an exhausted hunter, it said in the history books, burst through the door, and she was in the kitchen there, and he said he had a large bear on his tail. So all of a sudden they heard a hog screaming outside, real close to the house. She ran out. The hunter stayed inside, by the way. She ran out. She was a pretty brave woman there. But anyway, with a branding iron, and poked the bear with it as he was killing a hog. Yeah. So anyway, that's, yeah, interesting. The bear won, sadly. Yeah. Anyway, they did kill the bear later on there. So, but she also got burned too. So you can imagine, you know, some of the hardships, what they went through. Another lady there, same family there as my wife's there, she was out taking clothes off a wash line, and a bear came out of the woods. And supposedly, according to history, she never fully recovered from that. I could imagine a bear standing there, and you turn around, and you got washed there. So anyway, so of course, stories like that went from neighbor to neighbor, and you didn't have TV, you know. Probably everybody got together to have a work bee or whatever, you know, back then, and told these stories. So it's probably was interesting there. So with that, any other questions at all? I'll be here for a little while there. I do have a bunch of pelts. Everybody know what all these pelts are? I talked to some of you. What's this one? Fisher. Not very big, but pound for pound, probably the most vicious animal in the forest out there. Okay. This one, I had a small one up here too. What's this guy? It's a marten, pine marten. Yeah, this is the one that they hasn't passed legislature to get reintroduced. There were some references to pine martens, references to fishers as well. These guys said, you know, most people said we should have never reintroduced them, but they can't get this one through legislature right now. It's pretty tiny. I mean, they get a little bigger than this, but they're not very, you know, scary. How about this guy? Coyote, okay. That's the typical color pattern. If this was a wolf and I was holding it, his tail would be touching the floor right now. So wolves are a lot bigger. Genetically speaking, the coyotes around here through DNA samples, there's about 2% wolf in them. So they think somewhere in the past they bred with wolves. Basically, probably when the wolf population was real low. And then eastern coyote is, you know, genetically related to the western coyote, but a lot bigger too. So there's, you know, bobcats, of course, get a lot bigger. Got one of those pelts here. So, and everybody knows what this one is, right? Bear. Even that great hunt, I figured out when I said they each got that really good bear meat to eat there. Basically, figured out those bear on average were about 200 pounds. When you figured out based on the hunters there. So not very big, you know, 200-pound bear is not very big. Okay, yeah. Basically, it's, I'm not 100, I've never harvested a bear. I always wanted to, but never did, so anyway. So, anybody know? Anybody harvest one? Yeah. No, which tooth? I know it's not the canine teeth. I think it's one of these front teeth up in here. And basically what they do is they cut it and then count the rings on it. So that's how they could age it there too. This bear, how old do you think this bear was? Not very old, couple years. The one skull I have is about from here to here, probably goes out to there. That was over 500 pounds. Got hit by a car up to South Creek up that way there. So the teeth were all worn down to the gums and things like that. So anyway, but yeah. So any other questions at all before we wrap up? Yep.
The year of all the frost.
Yep.
It was 1860.
Yep.
And it was because of the volcano on Mount Tambora
Yep.
in the Pacific.
Yep.
And the following winter was brutal.
Yep.
And local people, deer were forced to eat nothing but mountain laurel. And when people harvested the deer and ate the deer, they got very intestinals.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, they dehydrated and couldn't eat anymore for a while. And the risk of starvation really went up
Yep.
high
Yep.
during that winter.
Yeah, and that's exactly, I mean, deer around here taste pretty good, but I've heard deer in the Poconos where they're primarily eating, mountain laurel and starving years taste terrible.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
yeah,
heard the
so,
same thing.
yeah, so, and that's what he said about volcanoes is exactly true. Why do you think that affected when they said they had a frost every year?
The ash cloud.
Yeah, the ash cloud. It blocked out sunlight, kept the temperatures low, and they had snow in July back then. Yeah, so yeah, hard to believe. I wish we had snow now. Yeah.
You know, as hot as it is this year,
Yeah.
I transcribed my great-grandmother's diary from 1875, and they went to a range, and it was 105, so they turned around and went home.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So.
Oh, it's just
Yeah.
been hot other times.
Yeah. Yeah. It has. Yeah. 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 So you can imagine. I mean, even lightning strikes. The one report there I read about hailstorms, the hail was 3 foot deep along a fence row. So picture that. What do you think happened to the crops? Yeah, they were gone. Yeah, so yeah, so lots of. You still haven't found that meteorite though. There was one that hit Troy. I think that one was 150 pounds or something like that. It landed. So if any of you know where that's at, it's worth a lot of money. And I'm related to you, so. Yeah, so. It was back in the 1800s there, yeah, yeah. So it's probably in a hedgerow somewhere out there, but yeah, so. If you come across it, let me know. So, no one knows what happened to it, so, yeah. So, kind of interesting, but, so. Well, other than that, thank you all for coming out tonight. Appreciate it there, and thank you.